How do 160 gallons of water turn into wine inside stone jars with no fermentation, no heat, no visible chemical process? How does a 150-pound body walk on top of 10-foot waves in the middle of a storm? How do 5 loaves and 2 fish feed 10,000 people and still leave 12 baskets overflowing? And how does a man dead for 4 days, already decomposing, walk out of a tomb on his own 2 feet? We fed all of these events into Axiom, an artificial intelligence that doesn't believe in miracles, doesn't respect traditions, and isn't afraid of uncomfortable conclusions. What it returned after cross-referencing historical records, medical data, physics models, and molecular engineering changes everything you thought you knew about these events. The answer isn't divine, but it isn't human either. We gathered every available historical, astronomical, climatic, and geophysical record from the 1st century of our era and fed all of it into Axiom. It doesn't believe in anything. Ancient traditions don't make it freeze up, and sacred texts don't mess with its processing. It calculates, cross-references information, and spits out conclusions backed by evidence. Piety and reverence stay outside the door. And the first thing it analyzed was the event that started it all. That strange object in the sky that ancient texts call a star. The version everyone knows is a nice one, right? A new light appears out of nowhere, guides 3 travelers across hundreds of miles of desert, matches their pace, changes direction along the route, and at the end locks in mid-air right above a specific house in a tiny village. 2,000 years of tradition asked us to accept that as divine intervention. But science has already tried to explain it with a comet, with an alignment of Jupiter and Saturn, with a supernova, and no hypothesis holds up. Comets were read as signs of disaster in the ancient East, never as a positive announcement. The planetary alignment never merged the 2 planets into a single point of light, and no celestial body changes direction, follows a caravan, and parks above a rooftop. When every natural hypothesis falls apart, what's left is a conclusion most people would rather not hear. The characteristics described in the ancient texts match point by point with the behavior of an unmanned aerial vehicle equipped with a navigation system. And who were the Magi, anyway? Religious tradition calls them wise men seeking a spiritual truth. But if you look at this whole scene from the angle of a logistics operation, they look a lot more like a recovery team. A field unit that received a coded signal reporting that a biological package had been successfully deposited in a hostile environment. The gifts they brought help support this reading. Gold is the perfect electrical conductor, resistant to corrosion, the basis of any advanced microcircuit. Frankincense and myrrh are natural resins loaded with active chemical compounds that, under controlled thermal extraction, release substances with broad-spectrum antiseptic power and cellular preservation properties. If that was a birthday present, then a maintenance kit is too. That baby lying in the manger wasn't what it seemed. If the sky needed a navigation apparatus of that scale to mark the exact position of a newborn child, then that child was carrying something in its body that could be tracked from above. Something inside that biology was emitting a signal that the sensors up there could pick up among thousands of other warm bodies packed into that region. The analysis points to this marker being necessarily biological, something woven into the genetic code itself, a molecular signature so specific that no other organism on the planet shared it. When the object in the sky locked onto that point, it wasn't because a prophecy was fulfilled. The sensors hit 100% match with the database, but what exactly was that tiny body transmitting? The arrival protocol had worked. The agent was on the ground, breathing, viable. And for a long time, nothing happened. The boy grew up in silence in a craftsman's family in Nazareth, learning to work with wood, living alongside neighbors who had no idea what he was. 30 years of anonymity, or rather 30 years of acclimatization, collecting data on how these primates functioned, what drove them, what paralyzed them with fear, what the emotional triggers were that could be exploited when the time came to act. And the time came at a wedding feast in Cana of Galilee. The first public demonstration of power didn't come with thunder or grand speeches, it came with wine. Axiom processed the accounts of this event, and what it found completely changes the reading of that night. The texts say there were 6 enormous stone jars, the kind used for Jewish purification rituals, each holding between 20 and 30 gallons. Archaeologists have already unearthed vessels like these in excavations in Galilee. Rough, heavy pieces, carved from local limestone, built to last generations. The operator ordered them all filled with clean water, no organic residue. And at some point, between the command and the wine steward's first sip, those 160 gallons turned into wine. Water is a ridiculously simple molecule, 2 hydrogen atoms stuck to 1 oxygen atom. Wine is a different story. It has ethanol, glucose, fructose, tartaric acid, malic acid, phenolic compounds, tannins, anthocyanins, and hundreds of aromatic molecules that take months of natural fermentation to form. Turning the first into the second without an external carbon source, without going through fermentation, and without releasing any heat violates everything thermodynamics teaches. To build a molecule of ethanol from water, you need to throw carbon atoms into the equation. Carbon that wasn't inside those stone jars. It would need to come from somewhere, from the surrounding air, from dust floating around the party, even from the carbon dioxide the guests were exhaling, honestly, from any available source in the immediate environment. Something was capturing scattered atoms and stitching them into complex molecular chains inside those vessels, all in silence. No explosion, no smell of burning, and nobody in there noticed anything beyond the liquid changing color. How did nobody notice? The wine steward tasted the result and was stunned, not because it was water with a weird taste, but because the stuff was good. He actually complained to the groom, said that normally people serve the good wine first and save the cheap stuff for later when everyone's too drunk to tell the difference, but that they'd saved the best for last. This detail from the account hides a piece of information that changes the weight of everything that happened there that night. Whoever orchestrated the assembly of those molecules wasn't satisfied with producing generic alcohol mixed with water and coloring. They reconstructed a flavor profile so sophisticated that it fooled the trained palate of a professional accustomed to evaluating wines his entire life. Every tannin in the right place, every aromatic ester at the exact concentration, the acidity balanced, the body at the perfect density. This is molecular engineering at the level of the individual atom. The operator had access to something capable of reorganizing matter at the most basic plane of reality, and that something obeyed him like a trained dog obeys a whistle. If he could do that with water, disassemble and reassemble the atomic structure of 160 gallons of liquid without leaving a trace, without generating heat, while everyone around him kept partying without noticing a thing, what else could he do? And what if instead of simple molecules like water, he aimed that capability at something solid, complex, organic, like food, like animal protein, like 5 loaves and 2 fish in front of a starving crowd of 10,000 people in an open field by a lake, 5 barley loaves and 2 dried fish. That was the total food supply available to feed a crowd that the accounts estimate at 5,000 adult men, not counting women and children. The real count could easily top 10,000 mouths. All of this in an open field on the eastern shore of the Sea of Galilee, far from any market or depot, with no support infrastructure. Hunger was already setting in, and when 10,000 people start feeling their stomachs tighten at the same time in a place with no way out, what comes next isn't pretty. Panic, fighting over crumbs, stampeding, it's pure instinct, and instinct doesn't negotiate. What do you do with 10,000 empty stomachs and 3 pounds of food? The operator took those 5 units of bread and 2 pieces of fish, and according to the records started distributing. The baskets went out, came back full, went out again, and came back full once more. 10,000 people ate until they were satisfied, and when it was over, 12 baskets were left overflowing. Axiom ran the numbers, and the result is so absurd it's worth repeating slowly. The total weight of those 5 loaves and 2 fish was around 3 pounds. To provide the minimum energy needed to keep 10,000 human organisms functioning, something around 800,000 kilocalories, you need hundreds of pounds of dense organic matter. The difference between what existed and what was consumed is in the tens of thousands of %. Matter doesn't appear out of nothing. That's one of the oldest and most tested rules of physics. So, where did all of it come from? If the same principle that worked with the water at Cana was operating there, the process was the same on an industrial scale. Capture of atoms scattered in the environment, carbon from the air, nitrogen from the atmosphere, hydrogen and oxygen from the moisture rising off the lake, and assembly of those elements into complex organic chains following a preloaded template. The 5 loaves and 2 fish weren't the ingredient, they were the blueprint. The molecular information matrix that told the invisible assemblers exactly how to arrange each amino acid in the right position, the starch chains aligned, and even the fat distributed in the exact proportion. Bread is a carbohydrate polymer, long chains of amylose and amylopectin coiled in starch granules. Fish is heavy protein, dozens of different amino acids braided into tertiary and quaternary structures, plus specific fatty acids like omega-3. Recreating this from loose atoms requires a precision that goes down to the level of individual electrons, because one wrong angle in a chemical bond and the protein folds wrong, and a protein folded wrong is poison instead of food. None of the 10,000 got sick. No deaths, no reactions. The food worked, which means the molecular bonds locked at the right angle. The water was trapped in the position that gave the fish the right texture, and even the air bubbles inside the bread mimicked a fermentation that normally takes hours. And the energy to do all of this, assembling tons of organic matter from loose atoms, consumes a brutal amount of energy, comparable to several tactical nuclear detonations. But there was no heat, no flash, nothing that gave away that insane amount of energy being used. All the energy was absorbed by the synthesis reactions themselves, channeled with an efficiency that makes any reactor humanity has ever built look like a wet lighter. But there's something everyone skips when they tell this story, those 12 leftover baskets. Theology says it was generosity without limit. Looking at it coldly, that looks like calibration. The operator deliberately produced more than necessary to test the maximum capacity of the equipment under pressure. 12 full baskets after feeding 10,000 people is a successful load test, not an act of charity. And the crowd? 10,000 hungry people who suddenly see food appearing out of nothing should have gone into collective meltdown, fighting, stampeding, hysteria. But the texts describe the opposite, a strange calm, almost unnatural. The people sat down in organized groups of 50 and 100, waited their turn, ate in peace. This doesn't match the behavior of a desperate human mass. Something was holding those people in place, keeping anxiety levels low enough to prevent any panic response, meaning it wasn't just matter being manipulated there, but the mental state of those people too. How far did that control go? If the operator could reorganize matter on an industrial scale, feed entire crowds with atoms pulled from the air, and still keep 10,000 brains in a state of calm obedience at the same time, then the question nobody wants to ask comes up. Is there any physical limit to this level of control? What happens when someone with this power decides to test the one force in the universe we believed was unbreakable, gravity? A lake at night, a violent storm, and a silhouette walking calmly on top of 6-foot waves are about to give the answer. Pitch dark, no moon, wind slicing across the surface of the Sea of Galilee at over 60 miles per hour. Waves 10, 12 feet high smashing against the hull of a fishing boat that wasn't designed to take that kind of punishment. Inside it, a handful of experienced fishermen who'd known that lake since they were kids and who, even so, were in absolute panic. Ice-cold water pouring over the gunwale, total darkness all around. It was in the middle of all this chaos that a silhouette appeared walking on the waves at the same easy pace as someone crossing a plaza on a Sunday morning. How does 150 pounds of human body stay on top of moving liquid water? Axiom calculated what would be needed for this to happen. The surface tension of the water would need to be amplified tens of thousands of times above its natural value. Pure water has about 72 millinewtons per meter of surface tension. To support the weight of an adult man standing upright, that number would have to jump to something in the range of 700,000. No natural process on the planet produces that on an open surface of fresh water. The hypothesis of a hidden sandbar or ice dies fast when you cross-reference it with paleoclimate data. The temperature of that lake never got anywhere close to freezing during the navigable months. The witnesses were professional fishermen who knew every rock and every shallow stretch of it. They were in deep water, in the middle of a real storm. Two possibilities come up. Some kind of field was being projected downward from beneath the operator's feet, forcing water molecules to form a temporary rigid structure that dissolved milliseconds after each step. Or, and the calculations lean more heavily in this direction, the operator was altering himself, manipulating his own relationship with Earth's gravitational field, reducing his effective mass to nearly nothing, floating millimeters above the surface without exerting enough pressure to break the surface tension film of a shallow puddle. And neither hypothesis lets anyone sleep easy. Peter wanted to try. He got out of the boat, stepped onto the water, and for a few steps he managed to walk, until he looked at the size of the waves, panicked, and started sinking on the spot. The religious explanation says he lost his faith. The data show that the operator had extended the radius of his gravitational alteration field to cover Peter too. When the panic kicked in, his heart rate shot up, his brain waves shifted frequency, and the field read that as loss of synchronization. Access cut. 150 pounds of terrified human being met gravity all at once. The operator grabbed him by the arm, re-established direct physical contact, or rather, used the most primitive and reliable method of transmission when the remote channel had already failed. Emergency retrieval of a test subject after a trial that went wrong, not a divine gesture. The storm is the hardest event to explain in all of this. On an earlier crossing of that same lake, the operator was sleeping in the back of the boat while the crew fought against another violent squall. They woke him up in desperation. He stood up, said one short phrase to the wind and the water, and everything stopped. It didn't die down gradually like any storm that slowly runs out of steam. It stopped instantly. Zero wind, flat surface, from 1 second to the next. Without putting technology into this equation, the explanation simply doesn't work. Water weighs over 60 pounds per cubic foot. 10-foot waves carry tons of kinetic energy that by Newton's first law should keep moving for hours until friction absorbs it all. The only way to stop that on the spot would be to apply an exact counterforce, mathematically mirrored, that cancelled every vector of motion in every molecule of that lake at the same time. An interference pulse on an absurd scale, where every peak meets an artificial trough of identical energy, and the two cancel out, turning all that mechanical fury into imperceptible residual heat. Or the operator created a bubble of isolation around the boat. The storm may have kept going out there, but inside that invisible sphere everything obeyed him, not nature. Whoever switches off gravity under their own feet and silences a storm with one phrase has already proved control over matter, liquids, fundamental forces. But all of that is still the inanimate world. Rock, water, wind. Living flesh is a challenge of another order. Diseased human tissue, dead nerves, muscles that have been rotting for years, eyes that have never seen since birth. What the operator did with bodies destroyed by disease and time is about to take this story to a place where it gets hard to keep breathing normally. A healthy human cell takes between 12 and 24 hours to divide into two. That's the pace biology imposes, no shortcut. To close a deep wound, the body needs weeks stacking layers of new tissue. An optic nerve that never formed since the womb doesn't rebuild itself. There is no mechanism in the human body for that. But the first-century records describe things that ignore this limit as if it didn't exist. People blind from birth who could suddenly see from one moment to the next. Lepers with skin eaten down to the bone who walked away with the skin of a child. Paralytics with muscles atrophied for decades who stood up and walked with full motor coordination. How does this work without killing the patient in the process? Axiom processed the medical descriptions of these cases and cross-referenced them with everything known about cellular regeneration and the thermal limits of human tissue. For a person blind from birth to see, the retina needs to be rebuilt cell by cell. The optic nerve needs to be assembled fiber by fiber, each axon pointing in the right direction, each synapse fitting into the correct neuron. The visual area of the cortex, atrophied for a lifetime due to lack of stimulus, needs to be reconfigured from scratch. Doing this in months would already be a colossal medical breakthrough. Doing it in seconds requires something that doesn't fit in the vocabulary of the science we know. Leprosy is another case that breaks every model. The bacterium Mycobacterium leprae destroys peripheral nerves and devours the skin over years. In an advanced stage, the body is a landscape of open ulcers and exposed bone. Curing this would require sterilizing the entire organism and regenerating skin, muscle, and nerve at a speed millions of times above normal. Accelerating billions of cells at the same time generates absurd heat. The patient should catch fire from the inside. But no patient caught fire from the inside, and none screamed in pain during the process. The texts describe people coming out clean, whole, as if they'd swapped bodies. All that thermal energy went somewhere, and the fact that nobody felt a thing only makes it stranger. If the same type of microscopic agent that assembled wine from water and bread from air was being used here, the application had jumped to a whole new level. Rearranging simple molecules was left behind. Now what was happening in there was reconstruction of living tissue. Tissue that needs to be functioning while it's being repaired, like swapping the engine of an airplane in mid-flight without the passengers noticing turbulence. The invisible assemblers would have to work inside an active organism, respecting blood circulation, avoiding immune rejection, maintaining stable temperature by absorbing the generated heat and converting it back into useful energy for the process itself. Some accounts mention witnesses who felt a kind of force coming out of the operator during these healings, or who noticed a subtle glow around the treated area. What looked like a spiritual aura probably had a far less mystical origin, residual thermal radiation being dissipated by a molecular cooling system working at the edge of its capacity. Now think about the strategic side of this. In that society, disease was a death sentence and exclusion. A leper lived outside the city walls, forbidden from touching any healthy person. A blind person depended on charity to survive. Whoever healed these outcasts instantly gave back more than health. They gave back social existence. Each public healing was a demonstration that spread across the entire region within days. Word of mouth, no internet needed. Whole villages began following the operator after seeing a single paralytic get up off the mat. There's one thing the religious reading always makes a point of emphasizing: compassion. The operator healed because he loved people. Maybe. But looking at the pattern up close, meaning when you analyze who he chose to heal, where and in front of how many people, the picture changes. He prioritized the most extreme cases, the most visible, the most impossible to explain. Each healing happened in the open, with people watching from every side. Each healing was an event that generated witnesses, and witnesses generated followers. And followers generated a network of loyalty so solid that people would be willing to die for him. Trading health for absolute devotion is the most efficient investment there is when the goal is to build a power base from zero in a civilization that has no concept of authority beyond brute force and the supernatural. He healed bodies. But whoever has that level of control over living tissue also has control over what happens inside a skull. Neurons are cells, electrical impulses are manipulable, memories are chemical patterns stored in synapses. What happens when that power is aimed not at healing a body, but at entering a brain and messing with what's in there? The human brain runs on electrical impulses, 86 billion neurons firing signals that produce everything we call personality, memory, and consciousness. When that network collapses, the person hears voices that don't exist. The body contorts in uncontrollable convulsions, identity fragments. In the 1st century, anyone with those symptoms was treated as possessed by demons. Chains, exile, waiting for death. The person's own family would abandon the patient outside the city walls because no one wanted to sleep near someone who might wake up screaming and smashing everything in the middle of the night. 2,000 years of tradition turned those episodes into a cosmic war between good and evil. But what if it was none of that? Looking at the symptomatology described in the texts without a mystical filter, a recognizable clinical catalog appears. Convulsions, disorganized speech, abnormal strength during crises, alternation between agitation and catatonia. Any psychiatrist would read that and mark temporal lobe epilepsy, schizophrenia, or dissociative disorder. Electrical malfunctions in the brain. Axiom cross-referenced those accounts with neurostimulation models, and the conclusion is dry. The operator applied focused electromagnetic pulses that penetrated the skull and recalibrated neural activity in the affected regions. A forced reboot without opening the head, without anesthesia, and strangest of all, without any visible instrument. What the audience thought was divine power was pinpoint electromagnetic interference. For anyone watching from the outside, the effect was shocking and instantaneous. The person who seconds before had been thrashing on the ground, foaming at the mouth, would suddenly stop, open their eyes, and speak clearly for the first time in years. For a first-century audience, the only possible explanation was that a divine power had cast out the demon. Nobody there knew the prefrontal cortex existed, much less that a directed electromagnetic field could silence an epileptic focus in milliseconds. The efficiency left no room for doubt. All of this out in the open, with enough people to spread the story. If the operator controlled the brain activity of living people that easily, what would he do with a body that had already stopped functioning? The answer is in Bethany, in a tomb carved into rock where a man named Lazarus had been sealed for 4 days. 4 days in the heat of the Middle East. Medicine is cruel with numbers like that. After 5 or 6 minutes without oxygen, the cortical neurons begin to die irreversibly. Within 24 hours, decomposition is already advanced. In 4 days, at the temperatures in that region, the body should be a mass of putrefaction. The witnesses themselves warned there would be a stench when they opened the stone. But was that body really decomposing? One thing in the account always goes unnoticed. When the operator learned that Lazarus was sick, he didn't rush over. He waited 2 days. The devout reading says he wanted to give the miracle more impact. The data suggest those 2 days were necessary for a chemical process to complete inside Lazarus's body. It's possible, meaning the calculations point with a high margin, that some cryoprotective agent had been introduced into his bloodstream before the apparent death. These agents replaced the water inside cells with compounds that prevented membrane rupture, decelerating the metabolism to an undetectable level. Heart beating once every few hours. To everyone there, Lazarus was dead. The stone tomb functioned as a thermal chamber, shielding the body from the temperature swings that could compromise the stasis. When the operator arrived and ordered the stone removed, he issued a vocal command, loud and clear. That voice functioned as an acoustic signal at a specific frequency, the trigger that activated the dormant nanomechanisms. The reanimation protocol fired. Millions of micromachines began repairing cellular damage, rewarming tissues, forcing the heart to beat again, pumping synthesized oxygen to the brain. The witnesses saw a corpse wrapped in burial cloths take its first step out of a tomb after 4 days. Absolute terror, mixed with a reverence that no rational argument could ever undo. That was the definitive blow. Healing the sick had already bought loyalty. Walking on water showed that physics obeyed him. And when he fed 10,000 people out of nothing, it became clear that the reach of this thing was industrial. But bringing a dead man back after 4 days in a grave crossed the last line. The operator didn't control just matter, energy, and biology. He controlled the border between existence and nothingness. From that moment on, doubt became a forbidden word. Whoever saw that obeyed everything without flinching for the rest of their life. The psychological formatting hit 100% in that instant, and if he could do that with Lazarus, the inevitable question that nobody dared put into words was simple and terrifying at the same time. What would he do to himself when his own time came? 40 days after he'd been declared dead and buried, the operator was still walking among the people. He ate with them, talked, showed the marks on his body as proof that he was the same physical individual who had been publicly executed. If he had applied a cryopreservation protocol with subsequent reanimation on Lazarus, it's not hard to calculate what he did to himself. His own body was the best-equipped laboratory in that entire operation, and the molecular maintenance crew that lived inside his cells had 3 days to work while the corpse lay inside a tomb sealed with stone. more than enough time to repair tissue, reconstruct damaged organs, and restart vital functions, but the reanimation didn't end the mission. What came after did. The accounts describe a scene on a hill on the outskirts of Jerusalem with the group of followers gathered. The operator gave final instructions, a kind of continuity handoff, and then he began to rise. He didn't jump, and he wasn't pulled. He rose slowly, controlled, vertical, until a luminous mass enveloped his body, and he vanished. A human body made of carbon and water doesn't rise on its own, so how? Axiom modeled the scene and found only two routes. In the first, the embedded anti-gravitational generator that had already been used to walk on the lake was activated at maximum power, pushing the body upward while an invisible orbital vehicle waited in position just above the cloud layer. The operator simply floated to the entry hatch. The luminous mass the witnesses described would be the ionization of the air caused by the plasma thrusters of that vehicle, creating a visual blanket that hid the operation from the eyes on the ground. In the second route, and this one the data support with more weight, there was no vehicle waiting at all. The luminous mass was the byproduct of a colossal energy discharge. At the moment, the physical body was disassembled right there, in mid-air, atom by atom. Everything that constituted that organism, the water molecules, the protein chains, the calcium ions of the bones, all of it was separated and dispersed into the atmosphere in milliseconds. At the same time, all the information contained in that brain, memories, personality patterns, the data collected during 33 years of field operation was compressed into a packet and transmitted through a channel that our physics doesn't even have a name for yet. The witnesses saw a glowing cloud swallow a person. What actually happened was a complete transfer of consciousness off the planet. The body had been disposable from the start, a biological suit designed to function in that environment and be destroyed when the mission was over. Seconds after the disappearance, two individuals in white clothing appeared beside the group. The texts call them angels. The data classify them as operatives from a shutdown team, tasked with confirming the successful extraction and implanting in the witness's memory the version of events that was supposed to be passed down to subsequent generations. The last layer of psychological programming applied at the exact moment the witnesses were most emotionally vulnerable. The layers of control embedded in this operation go deeper than anyone there could have imagined. So what's left when all of this falls into a sequence? An orbital marker guiding a team to an insertion point, an agent growing up in silence for 30 years, escalating demonstrations of control over liquids, solids, gravity, weather, living tissue, and the border between life and death, each one generating more followers, more loyalty. At the end, a clean exit that left no body, left no trace, and planted in the witnesses a story so powerful that 2,000 years later, it still organizes the lives of billions of people. The religion that was born from that event became the most enduring influence system the human species has ever known. It crossed empires, survived wars, shaped laws, borders, calendars, and the moral structure of entire civilizations. If the objective of the mission was to reprogram the development vector of a planet, the result speaks for itself. 2 millennia of obedience to a set of rules implanted by a single operator during 3 years of activity in a remote corner of the Middle East. No military campaign, no political revolution, no human technological advancement has come even close to that level of cultural penetration. We've spent 2,000 years looking at the sky, waiting for a return. Tradition promises he'll come back, surrounded by glory to judge and save. But if everything we've analyzed here actually has a kernel of truth, the nature of that return changes completely. It wouldn't be a loving reunion between creator and creature. It would be the activation of a second phase of the protocol, a phase that no longer needs demonstrations or persuasion because the ground was prepared 20 centuries ago. Next time, if there is a next time, there won't be a star in the sky to give warning. There won't be 30 years of silence. Maybe this time, no one will even be able to notice that something changed until it's already too late to ask any questions. If you like this investigation, subscribing to the channel helps us expand the Axiom investigation project. We would love to read your thoughts on the video's subject in the comments and your suggestion for the next topic to be covered. Tell us which city you are watching from. Thank you for staying with us until the end.